Accessing library computer data.
Out there are no saints. Just people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. It's been a long 4 years or whatever it's been to get to this point. We covered TNG, we covered TOS, we did all the movies, and now we're moving on to Deep Space Nine, which is what everyone has been clamoring for. We're going to be talking about the Emissary episode, which is the two-part opener, comprising the pilot and the second episodes of Deep Space Nine. In this one, a new crew takes command of a distant space station and makes an astonishing discovery that will change the galaxy. It was directed by David Carson. The story goes to Rick Berman and Michael Piller. Teleplay goes to Michael Piller. Aired back on January 3rd, 1993. We're joined by two special guests for this one. Clay is here, as always. Clay, how are you?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to this.
And we're joined by another special guest, Zack Hanlon, who is a writer for the AV Club. If you guys have ever Googled reviews for Star Trek episodes, his reviews for the AV Club are going to come up as either the 1 or 2 option on Google. Zack, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm excited to talk about this show again.
Yeah, when I emailed you asking or Twittered you or whatever, I slid into your DMs, as the kids are saying. I said, which episode would you want to watch? And you said, well, they're all garbage at the start, so how about just the pilot? So we're off to a good start. You got the episode that you wanted, and we'll take it from...
It's comparatively it's less garbage than if you already survived the first season of Star Trek Next Generation. There's nothing here that's going to kill you.
No,
so you got that going for you.
That's true.
I'm really glad that you guys said that now, because I was feeling bad about my opinion when I came into this. So it's good to know that the bar is pretty low on everybody's side here.
This is, we're going to be talking about Emissary. So I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to play an audio clip. And then me, Zack, and Clay are going to come back, and we're going to break down Emissary.
Come. Commander, yes, please, come in. Welcome to Bajor. It's been a long time, Captain. We met before. Yes, sir. We met in battle. I was on the Saratoga at Wolf 359.
I assume that you have been briefed on the events leading to the Cardassian withdrawal.
Yes, sir. I understand they spent the last half-century robbing the planet of every valuable resource before abandoning it.
They've left the Bajorans without a means of being self-sustaining. The relief efforts we've been coordinating are barely adequate. I've come to know the Bajorans. I'm a strong proponent for their entry into the Federation.
Is it going to happen?
Not easily. Ruling parties are at each other's throats. Factions that were united against the Cardassians have resumed old conflicts.
Sounds like they're not ready.
Your job is to do everything short of violating the Prime Directive to make sure that they are. I have been made aware by Starfleet of your objections to this assignment. I would have thought that after 3 years spent at the Utopia Planitia Yards that you would be ready for a change.
I have a son that I'm raising alone, Captain. This is not the ideal environment.
Unfortunately, as Starfleet officers, we do not always have the luxury to serve in an ideal environment.
I realize that, sir, and I'm investigating the possibility of returning to Earth for civilian service.
And perhaps Starfleet Command should be considering a replacement for you.
That's probably a good idea.
I'll look into it. In the meantime, however...
In the meantime, I will do the job I've been ordered to do to the best of my ability, sir.
All right, guys. So I'm excited to be starting Deep Space Nine. Clay, you're here because you decided that you're going to be doing the Dominion arc. The Dominion are not involved in Emissary, but I thought it was important to get you off on the right foot with the pilot to figure out what's going on. You've never seen Deep Space Nine except for maybe 1 or 2 episodes. So I think it'll be interesting for you.
Yeah, all of these things that you've said so far sound like Queensryche album titles, so I'm in.
It's a long way to go. And Zach, you have obviously seen all of them. You've written up write-ups about all of them. So what'd you think about Emissary as a start?
Oh, well, do you mean now or what? I actually went back and reread my review, just 'cause I was curious what I made of it at the time. I think going in, I was fairly optimistic just because everybody, when I was doing Next Generation, all the people who were really enjoying Star Trek and commenting on the review were like, are you going to do DS9? It's the best one. So I was going into this with certain expectations, and I think I'd actually seen this one before, even before I started doing the review coverage. And at the time, I was sort of like, this is interesting. It has potential, but there's definitely some flaws. Watching it again now and knowing where the show goes, there are things that I appreciated more, and there are things where I was just sort of like, okay, that's not so great. I don't hate it. I actually find it in a lot of ways kind of endearing just because it is sort of rough around the edges and they're sort of figuring it out, and knowing how far the show has to go and what it becomes when it really kind of kicks off, which is probably somewhere around. There are a couple episodes in the first season, and in the second season it starts getting into gear with serialization and everything. It made me happy, to be honest. It's definitely there's lots of flaws, there's lots to dig in there, but I have a tremendous affection for this show, and it was really great to revisit that.
Clay, what's your kickoff opinion about the Emissary pilot episode?
I'll be honest with you. I had a tough time getting through this because this felt long. This felt real long.
It does feel long.
It was. I think it was a bit of a system shock coming back to this after doing the movies, because it's so unpolished, and on top of that, it was never remastered, so it looks pretty crummy.
Yep.
And it feels, I was wondering about this because when we were watching TNG, all of that had been remastered and stuff. So I don't know if it's unfair to compare the two, but this one feels cheaper too, even though it's got a bigger set. It just, something about it just feels cheaper than TNG, which I didn't know that was possible. It has, I feel like, my thing is always I'm a sucker for big ideas and character things. So it was kind of refreshing to see a Star Trek show start with an actual character event that kind of played into everything else, because I feel like they didn't do that in TNG, right?
No, absolutely
like they don't
not.
focus.
No.
And I felt like it kind of came together towards the end, everything post the baseball scene. But it took a long time to get there, and I don't know if it was entirely satisfying for me.
I think that it's I think you kind of have to look at it two ways, right? It's, as a pilot, it feels like, as a pilot of television, it feels very dated to me. It's a lot of, here a character walks in, he says, "Hi, I'm Lieutenant so-and-so. This is my backstory," in 3 sentences, and then they walk off.
Or they have the glowing exposition orb that gives you the backstory for you.
My literal favorite moment
of
it. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to get this in real quick. My literal favorite moment of exposition dump is when they're getting ready to fly out to the wormhole, or like Kira and the others, and Odo literally says, "By the way, I am a complete. No one knows where I came from. We discovered me as a baby," and so there's this 2-minute thing where you're just, oh, God bless. That character is one of my favorite of the shows, but you literally can feel everything around him just sort of stop.
Yes.
Just so he can get those 2 lines out. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, guys, there's got to be a more elegant way to do this than that. But
so it feels very pilot-y to me in that way, like a very dated kind of pilot, where they're like, here are all the things, and this is how we're going to do it. I appreciated that it's not like TNG, and that they sort of, all the characters are being set up for things later on, and like they are introducing them as separate, unique characters. My wife's takeaway was that the female characters are actually people in the pilot of this one.
Oh yeah, it's like one of the things that I love about the show is that Kira especially is one of the best Star Trek characters ever, and probably the best female character I've ever seen on Trek. I mean, I haven't seen a later series, but she's phenomenal. Here, she's a little bit strident.
Yeah, she's off to a rough start, I think.
But she gets, there is a level of nuance there and compassion, which is just, you felt like they were trying to get that with Troy and Beverly Crusher, but they just couldn't quite. And those are great characters.
Well, and the other way for me to take this is that after you get past the character beat stuff, the second part of the episode, which is mostly Cisco in the wormhole, is, in my opinion, it's really poetic. And it's something that the Deep Space Nine is going to distinguish itself from the other series by the way that it does this. It has this really sort of, it's kind of a beautiful metaphor that I don't want to think about too much because I would overthink it and it would ruin it for me. But the whole linear time type thing where your memory is sort of like going back in time for yourself is a really cool idea. It's a great way to get Cisco storyline involved in here, even though there are a ton of problems with the Cisco character in this one that I want to get into. But those are the two sort of segments of the show that I see at this point. So before we get into that sort of like guidance of how I think we can talk about it, Clay, we'd been talking about how we wanted to revisit the Prisoner podcast, right? Do a sort of, since The Prisoner and Star Trek have both always been fans of the Western genre, we would do a Western take. And we've sort of been leading to this, right? Deep Space Nine is basically the Western of the Star Trek family. It has the father and son off to the frontier, right? The frontier that no one's ever been to. It has a cast of characters who are being brought together that are trying to settle sort of a new town, which in space is this space station. And
Quark is constantly calling Cisco a cocksucker.
That's right. And you've got the young hotshot doctor who's out to make a name for himself. You've got Kira, who's basically a Native American in this storyline. So what did you notice that? Did you think about that, or does it make a lot of sense to see Deep Space Nine as the Western of the Star Trek family?
Now that you say that, it makes a lot more sense, but honestly, that didn't even cross my mind. And to be fair though, I'm glad, because if they had kind of hammered that home more, I don't think I would have responded to it at all. But now that you said that, I can I can definitely see that was the intention there. And yeah, that's an interesting way to do it. I had a tough time with the characters in the show, to be honest with you.
Let's start with Cisco. Can you start with Cisco? Did you have a problem with Cisco?
Not entirely.
Okay.
I thought the scene with Cisco and Picard was really great. And I really like the setup for Cisco in the anger that he brings with him about his wife dying in the Borg fight, and holding spite and some bitterness towards Picard. In that scene, I wrote down, maybe they did this, I don't know, and I just didn't see the episode, but I was wondering why they never did an episode like that in TNG, where someone who gets killed by Picard's Borg attack has to come in,
come to terms with
that. I don't know if they ever did that in the show, but I feel like they missed an opportunity to do that, because that as soon as they did that scene, I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. I wish they did that more.
See, I think it might take time for you to, I guess, settle into the Deep Space Nine mentality. Like, I don't know if that's an idea that could have existed in the TNG universe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, the thing that's funny about the Cisco-Picard interaction to me is that I remember when this came out and I was younger watching it, and I did not like the show because I didn't like the way that Cisco was talking to Captain Picard. You know what I mean? Like, the difference here as an adult, I really kind of appreciate how differently they're trying to set them up from each other. Mm-hmm. And it's really unique to me to have this character come in and be angry. And I think Patrick Stewart does a better job in all of his scenes here than he does in any of the movies that they did, really.
Yeah, he's good in this. He's really good.
His goodbye to O'Brien is more emotional than any goodbye in Nemesis ever. So, and that's for just his transport chief. But yeah, I mean, Zach, do you have any opinions about the characters at this point, or is there a take on it that you had?
Well, I mean, my original first review I ever wrote, the first line was that Benjamin Sisko is an angry man, and I thought that was one of the more striking elements of the pilot, is that, like, the original first season of, like, Next Generation, Picard was kind of a grump, but he was always very much he wanted to be there. This was like his ideal job, and this was the place he could, like you really. The reason that show is watchable at all in the first season is often, to me, because of Patrick Stewart. Whereas here, it's much more of an ensemble show, so we have a bunch of different characters revolving around Sisko who holds them together, but you already have that start from the very beginning, that sense of Sisko as someone who isn't necessarily a company man. He's invested in the Federation, but he's like, it's kind of a cliche that he's already considering retiring and then changes his mind by the end. But I feel like that, along with his sort of disgruntlement with Picard, while they may not be things that have longer implications, like the relationship he has with Picard here doesn't ever really come up on the show again. It's not really something you can sustain. But it sets this tone of, this is not going to be a show where everyone agrees and everyone is in it for this utopian view of the future, where we're going around and exploring all these new cool sci-fi setups. This is going to be a situation where we have someone who is struggling to hold all these disparate elements together. Like the show gets increasingly, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the show does get very cynical about, well, not cynical exactly, but it gets very suspicious and very interested in how these various systems work and how governments hold together and how hard it is to maintain sort of levels of control when you have all these different planets and different species and different ideas of what's right and what's wrong. And one of the things I really appreciate about, again, this is partly speaking in retrospect, is how it does set up from the beginning that it's not going to be a get along, everybody's going to be happy and get along. I don't want to oversell the disgruntlement, because it's not as if Cisco, like by the end of the episode, you get a clear sense that these people are going to at least be able to work together. And but I love that idea of Deep Space Nine being willing to dig into character a little more, because one of my things, while I do love Next Gen and I do find it a very comfort food show, it also is a kind of show where that everybody just sort of agrees almost all the time. Like it's a very positive, we all have the same basic goals here. It's very simple. We all live in this one place, and we're all they'll like in the Deep Space Nine, not really getting lost in sentences here, but Deep Space Nine is much more about it. Like you said, it's about the sort of Western idea, but whereas the original Star Trek and Next Gen were about exploring the frontier, and Next Gen I think was about bringing civilization, and like the Deep Space Nine is about what happens next.
Yes.
Like after you've actually explored, you start to build cities, and sort of what happens when you start to actually try and build coalitions of all these different warring factions. And I find the stuff with Cisco and Picard interesting because it sets the tone, I think. It's a different side of Picard than you've seen, because this is a character. It's a bold choice too. Like you say, as a kid, you were upset with the show because of the way it treated Picard. That's a bold choice to have this figure who you spent seasons of building trust with the audience have this new character come in and go, "I don't like you because you killed my wife." Right. Even if it is, it's a very tone-setting moment. Yeah. So I feel like the episode is not particularly elegant in a lot of ways. And there's lots of clumsiness and like awkwardness, but I also feel like the seeds are there. And I just talked a really long time.
I just to kind of jump off of that, I think the thing that bothered me was, I mean, I understood the arc of Cisco in the episode, and it made sense to me, but I wish that they had held on to the anger thing longer. Like the resolution that he comes to here, I feel like would have been more satisfying if this was like later in the season, if not maybe like season 2 or something. Because you know what I mean? It's I really liked what they did. I really liked that they used this entity that doesn't understand linear time to kind of remind him about all the reasons why he's happy to be alive, and it's kind of like a long form therapy session for him. But I was so interested by the idea that he was so disgruntled and was so angry that I was kind of hoping that was going to be his character arc for a while, but apparently, I mean, I guess you can't. I mean,
Cisco's temper never completely goes away. He's much more of he's never like an anti-hero. There's like a couple episodes maybe, but like you're never supposed to like not be concerned about his anger, but he's at least a much more passionate and engaged Star Trek. Like he's like it feels much more personal with him. I do see what you're saying, and if they wanted to actually create an arc with that, but the sort of that temperament doesn't completely go away. There are lots of very very passionate. Like it's one of the interesting things to watch him and Kira sort of bounce off each other as the show goes on.
See, Clay, I can sort of see your point of view from this one, having never seen this one before, because I think that the ideas in it are actually bigger than the execution is. Because I think the problem with Cisco in this episode is that scene to scene, he bounces back and forth and the anger isn't consistent within
I
him.
was just gonna say that. The scenes he has with Kira, I feel like aren't super consistent because like it's almost like they told him, all right, she's gonna be the anger one here, so you have to be the happy one,
right?
Like, you know,
sure.
and it's not. There is a lot of bouncing around.
I even think it starts off on the wrong foot where, you know, his wife dies and then it goes 3 years in the future and he's talking to Jake, and Jake is the one who doesn't want to go to Deep Space Nine, and
Exactly,
Cisco's like,
yeah.
oh, it'll be a good time, you'll have kids to play with. If they want to play that scene that way, it has to be clear that he's putting on a good face for his son and he doesn't want to go either.
Yeah, definitely.
I do want to talk a little bit about Cisco versus Picard because I think it's interesting in a sort of like lazy writerly way how opposite Cisco is from Picard. He's like, if you go through it, right, you have Cisco's the family man, Picard is the eternal bachelor. Cisco is the everyman. He plays baseball. You know, he likes baseball. Picard is the Renaissance man who speaks different languages and reads books in his spare time. Cisco is willing to befriend his like the underling lieutenants and everything like that. He goes up to them and approaches them. Picard has always been very standoffish with the lower officers. It's interesting to me how different they are in almost a cliche. It's almost like they held up a mirror and like, we'll just make an exact opposite character of Picard as this new captain.
I mean, to go off that, if you think about it, that is kind of what they did with Next Gen and the original Trek.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because Picard and Kirk are polar opposites. Kirk's the sort of pulp, two-fisted hero. He can be a negotiator, but he's also... And, like, Picard can do that, but Picard is much more of an intellectual character. And I feel like Cisco is not... He's not... No, it's no shorts in the intellectual department, but he is much more of a... Again, he's not a company man. He doesn't... Like, Picard is, as you said, he's a bachelor. There's a sense of him... The Federation probably matters to him more than anything else. His place as a captain on the starship matters more than anything else. Whereas with Cisco, you never really get the sense that he cares more about being a commander than he cares about, you know, his family or about the people around him. Like he's much more of a... I think it is an interesting contrast, and one that becomes much more interesting as the show goes on again, where Cisco becomes more nuanced. Whereas here, a lot of the stuff he says just sort of feels like, well, we need to have a conflict for this first episode, so let's have him talk about quitting Starfleet.
Yeah.
Which is why would you not make that decision before you went to this outpost in the middle of nowhere, which clearly desperately needs some stability in order to get by, and your first reaction is, I don't think so.
Picard should just be like, why the fuck did you interview for this job?
You're
not going to take it.
When they got to that point in the scene, it actually took me by surprise because like I liked that scene and I liked what was going on, but when he said that, I was like, what? They've made no indication up till this point that he was unhappy with this posting or even thinking about that. In like even his anger level, obviously because he's in the room with Picard, but his anger level like spikes in that scene.
Yeah.
To a point that you never see up. And again, obviously it's Picard and he's the one responsible for his wife's death. But like there's nothing leading up to that gives you the indication that he's thinking about leaving.
And I will say that Avery Brooks as an actor is a sort of actor who will go in these big swoops of emotional temperament. And it does work better as they get a sense of who Cisco is later on. Like there is one of the jokes for the series is that when he shaves his head, that's when they figure out who Cisco is.
Yeah. Right.
It's like with Riker and the beard, and it's definitely them trying to figure out how to write this character, and Brooks just sort of playing each moment to the hilt, as opposed to sort of like working to try and find a more consistent character. Whereas Patrick Stewart is much. I don't know if Brooks has the same kind of training as Picard. Picard brings sort of a classical theater approach, and Brooks feels much more, I would almost say, methody, or much more like raw, and that works when the character is written to support that. But yeah, in this case, it just sort of feels like a lot of the times there are a couple of moments like in those scenes with the wormhole aliens whose name
the Prophets.
Prophets. Thank you. God, that's really complicated too. The Prophets, where he'll just like switch through emotions so fast that you're wondering if he's unwell.
Yes.
Like he just like laughing, and no, I'm angry, and laughing. It's like, oh, okay. And once the writers figured out how to write for that, it can be immensely powerful. There's stuff later on that he does that's just remarkable, just really, really fantastic work. But in this episode, because they're trying to still play it with a lot of these sort of expected sci-fi conventions, he's not there yet, and I feel like that there's a sort of contrast between the actor and the character isn't really consistent. So yeah, it definitely kind of underlines that.
Clay,
Yeah, those.
Oh, sorry. Well, Clay, we're going to be talking about Avery Brooks' acting throughout the series, I think. So, but yeah, go ahead with your point.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say I didn't know if that style was consistent, because watching him in those moments where he was kind of swinging around and every now and then he would kind of just turn on a dime. It said, having not really seen the show before, it said to me that he himself was not entirely sure how to play this character. It seemed like it was almost like he was doing his best to remain restrained, but every now and then he just kind of had, it slipped out and he kind of had a little bit of a burst, like he wanted to be more animated, but he has to play the uptight officer. But
my weird schism with Brooks, right, would be described as he can do scenes really, really well. Like, I think his scene of like, I should have died with her on the ship that day or whatever, like his scenes of sadness and anger, he's very, very good at. His scenes of excitement come across as forced and cheesy. Like when he turns into Michael Jackson on the beach when he's talking to his wife.
Yeah.
That feels really, really bad. And he occasionally is forced to do those types of things, and it never really comes across well.
I do have another question about Cisco and his family. Having watched many TV shows that start off with a kid, how soon does his kid no longer be a part of the show?
Oh no, Jake is a major part of the show.
Yeah,
is he?
In a
the
good way.
Series.
The relationship. The relationship between Jake and Cisco is one of the series' strongest points.
Oh, that's fantastic, because I was expecting it to be like Miami Vice, where it's all about it's all about Crockett and his family until like halfway through the season, and then his family has to move to Virginia or something.
Yeah, Jake is here throughout the entire run of the series. So
that's good to hear. That's refreshing.
Yeah, and it's not a point to talk about now, but I think it actually leads to it's a very good, well-done relationship that also leads to a few storyline problems, but we'll run into that when we get to it. I wanted to talk about this episode aired right after Chain of Command in TNG Season 6. Chain of Command came out like the week before this episode aired as sort of like setting the stage for the Cardassian-Bajor relationship. The reason they're on Bajor is that Kira was supposed to originally be played by Ro Laren, that character from TNG.
I was going to ask. I wasn't totally sure if that was the same race, but apparently it is. So
the occupation of Bajor is going to be a very important thing. The episode is called Emissary for a reason, because Cisco is the emissary of the prophets, the Bajorans, and that we learned that. Bajor is interesting to me in that it's discussing a very dark topic that the reflection of the people on Bajor and the people serving doesn't seem to totally reflect what they've all gone through for 50 years. Does that make sense?
I think it's a hard thing to sell in a show like this, which is essentially escapist entertainment. I mean, not that it's not more nuanced and complex than that, but yeah, I get what you're saying, but I also think it'd be really, really tough to do this. I mean, because essentially this is like if like the Nazis have been around for 50 years or something horrible like that. It's a very, very, the occupation is a dark time, and you get a better sense of that as the show goes on. But I also think would have been a very difficult task to sort of give that as much weight as it might actually have in real life.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about the show, right, is that there's 7 main characters. 3 of them aren't Starfleet, and 3 of them have a more Bajoran relationship. They don't actually interact with the Cardassians much differently than the Starfleet officers do, which is the problem. Like Kira's people have basically been downtrodden and sort of stomped in the ground by the Cardassians for a while, but she doesn't really, outside of the occasional sentence of like, oh, these dirty Cardassians, like O'Brien seems to have a worse opinion of the Cardassians than Kira does at this point. And it's something that always strikes me as a little bit odd, but I did want to, what do you guys think about the fact that almost half the cast is not Starfleet characters? Because you have Odo, Kira, and Quark, who are the main leads.
It's great. I think it's great. I think it's essential to the series. And I actually I think that the biggest problem for me was there's stuff between Dukat and Kira later on that I don't think was handled as well as it could have. But I always thought with Kira that I always found it fascinating that they sort of, I don't know, to me I always sort of read it as after a while you just get so used to having these people as enemies as a part of your life that you have to sort of treat them a certain way. Like it's really hard to remember it's easier to forget that these people weren't supposed to be there, and that this was this horrible invasion. I felt like that was, in a way, when it's done well, it can actually be fairly nuanced. Like there's some interesting stuff about the trauma later on. Here, because it's more just sort of like, hey, they're new Klingons. Remember when we didn't like the Klingons? They're kind of like Klingons, only they're dicks.
They're the evil James Bond villains, as we've said on the podcast.
Yeah, and it does sort of, I could see that sacrificing nuance. I think for me, I don't remember having huge problems with it as it went on. But I love the fact. I especially love the way it shows the stuff that you learn later on about Odo, and I just love the fact that we actually have a Ferengi character who doesn't suck. I mean, Quark has his bad moments. There are some terrible Ferengi episodes coming up, but Quark is actually a pretty solid character, and his relationship with Odo is, again, one of the series' great strengths.
Yeah, he was definitely more interesting than any Ferengi that was on TNG.
God,
he's basically Swearingen, right? He's sort of he's not on the level of Swearingen, but he's the Swearingen character of this series.
He's like if Swearingen wasn't actually good at anything,
right?
Because Quark is kind of terrible at being evil. He'll like try, but he's just kind of he's never going to really succeed. But he's also kind of he's not. They find this fine line between making him so he's not so successful that he becomes a monster, but he's also not so pathetic that you feel incredibly bad for him, or he just comes off as an idiot. So it's
Yeah, I had to kind of readjust. I mean, I'm sure this will get easier as I watch it, but I had to kind of readjust my what characters I should not let my eyes glaze over while watching in the show, because the TNG is usually anybody who's wearing the earth tone non-Starfleet uniform is just sort of like, well, I don't really want to listen to what this person's saying anymore. But these guys were pretty good. I actually felt like the Starfleet characters were fairly, like the supporting characters were fairly stiff. I didn't really care for many of them, but Quark I liked, and Kira was good, and Odo was pretty interesting. But I mean, I didn't really like the Doctor very much, and the woman that used to be a guy for some reason.
Dax.
I didn't like her at all.
Dax gets a bit better. They struggle with Dax. Bashir is kind of a twerp at the beginning, which is unfortunate. He becomes one of my favorite characters later on. But yeah, he just is kind of a twerp in the first episode in the first season. But hey, Cole Meany, O'Brien's great. He's great.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
I think what part of it was is, I mean, I don't know if this is just because I'm so familiar with the TNG guys, but the Starfleet characters seem to lack a visual distinctiveness that they usually have.
Sure.
No
visors.
If you looked at the cast of TNG all lined up, they all look very, very different. And these Starfleet members just, I don't know, they seem kind of blank to me. Dax is like, I didn't even realize she was an alien until a little bit later because I couldn't see the dots on her neck.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just didn't, their differences didn't stand out to me as much as it has in the past. And the fact that they were kind of bland characterizations, at least in this episode, didn't really help that. But I mean, I'm sure it's a pilot. I'm sure they'll get better.
It's also based on as I mentioned before, it's each character comes in and says 2 sentences about themselves, and then they kind of fade into the background for the rest of the movie.
Or you get some sort of weird flashback where you're transplanting like a symbiote worm or something.
Are you familiar? You didn't watch the Trill episode on TNG with us, so
I don't think so.
No, the Trill are basically, the little worm thing is basically what the person is. They kind of flesh this out in Deep Space Nine, but the little slug thing lives for a very long time, and it gets transplanted into different hosts over the course of its lifetime.
Sure.
So that's
I feel like it's I get more affectionate with those characters as the show goes, but I think they're always kind of going to struggle because the people who have had relationships with Bajor and have a direct connection to Bajor, then the Bajoran Pass and the Cardassian occupation, they already have these long, complicated histories with each other and with the space station, and you already feel like they're much more connected to the main storyline than, especially in the pilot. But Bashir, if you had said that he died in the next episode, you'd have been like, eh.
Exactly.
His characterization is literally that he awkwardly hit on Dax.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that stays around for a while. Those characters become more interesting. Bashir gets a lot more interesting when he's with his relationships with O'Brien, unexpectedly enough, and with another character who is not introduced in this episode, but who is one of the best characters in the series and in Star Trek as a whole.
Yeah,
so,
Worf.
No, Worf is actually good on this one. Worf is good.
That's what I've heard, that he's very good.
But Garrick he comes in a few episodes. I forget exactly when.
I think he's the next episode, actually.
Yeah, I think you're right. And he's phenomenal. And his relationship with Bashir makes him Bashir. Because the problem with Bashir is that right now he's just sort of the blank slate character. He's just the nice kind of keen doctor guy, and that can be a hard character to write for. And especially when he's surrounded by all of these other far more complicated. I mean, even Cisco, who is in the I am the leading man guy, he has a complicated past, and he's played by Avery Brooks. And even at his worst, it's very hard to forget that Avery Brooks is there. And I think Alexander Siddig, how do you pronounce his last name?
Yeah, Al Siddig, I think.
Yeah, I think he's a fine actor. I think he's terrific. And I just think, I think the pilot doesn't serve him or Terry Farrell particularly well.
He didn't last very long on Game of Thrones, though, unfortunately for him.
He was on Game of Thrones?
Yeah, he's the Prince of Dorne, the King of Dorne, the wheelchair-bound guy.
No shit.
Yeah.
Oh, no kidding.
Yep.
I do think this show is more successful in establishing the ensemble right away than they have been in the past.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It seems like. Oh, I was just gonna say, it seems like you said, they all have an established relationship on Deep Space Nine that is pretty clear from the get go, and like I said, the Starfleet guys are a little bit bland, but they it all works together in a way that TNG didn't really. I mean, you could argue that it never really got as good of an ensemble as they seem to have here.
Yeah, the thing about TNG is that when you cast Patrick Stewart in that part, like that performance is, his Picard is one of the greats. Like that is one of the highlights of just like TV drama in general. Like he is a phenomenal, and he, like the rest of the cast, God love them, they try, and they're often very endearing, and I grew to love them all over the run of the show. But none of them are really on the same level as Patrick Stewart. Whereas here, it feels like all the actors, even the ones that aren't quite as give a chance to fill it in, at least it feels like a more even playing field. Nobody kind of shines so brightly that you're sort of like not interested in finding out about anybody else.
Yeah, it's much more of a median than a highs and lows type thing that TNG is capable of. Yeah. I mean, I guess I wanted to move into the second half of the story, which is really because, Clay, I sound a little bit more positive on the episode, I think, it's mostly sort of the excitement of a new series kind of is bleeding through. But the fact that I agree with you that the pilot feels a little bit dated and it drags, but I think that the second half is much better than the first half because I love everything that has to do with the wormhole and the prophets and everything like that. For your information, the prophets and the wormhole are going to stick around for a very, very long time.
Okay.
Did you not care for the wormhole section, like the sort of poetic nature of it, or were you interested in it?
It wasn't the poetic nature of it that I didn't like. I'm perfectly fine with that stuff. I don't know. Like, so the other thing I have to recalibrate myself for this show is the reason that I never watched it at the time was because when I was younger, TNG, my least favorite episodes were the ones that were all about just like diplomacy. And from what I could see, Deep Space Nine just seemed to be always about diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, it was, when they get into the plot with Cisco and the orbs and, there's some prophecy about him, and then he's in this wormhole, and then they step out into this planet that half of it is the planet from City on the Edge of Forever, and the other half is like the Garden of Eden, and like I just didn't care. I didn't care about what was happening because like there was no plot that was engaging to me at that point. I think if Cisco's anger had been a little bit more consistent, I would have been more engaged. But like they just started getting into a fairly uninteresting, for me anyway, mystical sci-fi thing that just didn't grab my attention. And once he gets sucked into the thing, and he was dealing with like stupid Q, basically.
Yes,
it was like having to his explanation of what time was eventually it paid off, but it just felt like it took forever to get there.
It is very long. It's a very long sequence because it's basically like 30 minutes of him in the wormhole. I think I agree with you about the anger thread being more consistent. I would have also, they don't really ever hammer home what the emissary role is in this, and he seems remarkably unimpressed by the fact that this race of people thinks that he's basically a prophet for them. And it never comes across, he never questions about like, why do you think this, or like, what am I supposed to do? He just kind of goes along with the Bajorans who are like, oh, you are the emissary, all this stuff. And so it doesn't really hit home on that level for me in terms of like a narrative thread that goes throughout the episode. But I do like just the direction and everything felt very unique to me for a Star Trek episode, of like the cutting between scenes and like lines of dialogue, or cutting between scenes as he's talking over them. He's going into different things. And I really like the metaphor of what they're trying to talk about, that these like ignorant aliens that aren't sure about like what time is are kind of torturing him by making him relive painful memories. And he's forced to acknowledge that, yes, we live in the past and it is our existence and time is circular, and your sort of weird metaphor for it. And I think it's kind of interesting, although the first time I watched the episode, I didn't really like that scene. The more I've rewatched it, the more I appreciate it for how different it is from all the other series. At this point.
It's weird actually. I went back and reread my original review for the pilot, and my major criticism of the episode were those sequences, which surprised me because watching it again, I actually didn't mind them at all. And I don't know if it's just because I've seen the rest of the show, so while I have problems with how that arc plays out, I am impressed with the fact that they don't just toss it away as soon as it gets complicated. They do try to keep coming back to that and have that be a part of the series on some level. I don't know why that's changed for me, but I enjoyed it a bit more. I found it a little more interesting, and it felt less like, I think at the time I just thought, well, because the problem with a storyline like this is it sort of removes, it sort of like becomes less sci-fi and more magic. And it takes that sort of, and that's always been sort of a staple of Star Trek. You've always had the godlike beings who come in and have these powers that nobody can possibly understand. But, it's really science fiction because they're really technologically advanced, even though they're basically doing magic. Whereas the emissaries, it just sort of felt like another extension of that. And it felt like them, I guess the fact that they, knowing that this isn't something that they just sort of put in for flavor, knowing this is actually a core part of that's like an idea the series will wrestle with over its run, whether or not it does it entirely successfully, at least it's something that's actually it's not something that's just tossed off lightly. Yeah, and I think.
I was just going to say, knowing that, I appreciate it a little bit more because it.
Did you think this was the end of that storyline, sort of?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I guess that's what I guess that's what bothered me about it, was that it seemed to only be there to be like a therapy session for Cisco.
Oh, that's interesting.
From where I was watching it, it seemed like it was taking away the most interesting part of his character that I had come across up to that point, which is only one episode. But
the interesting thing about that too is it never occurred to me. But when I came to, I don't know about your history with the shows, but for me, when I came into this, I'd never seen a substantially serialized Star Trek show. So I came into this after, I knew it was going to be serialized, but I came into this after watching Next Gen, which has some light serialization, but mostly not, and the original series, which just doesn't. And so I was more used to those one-off plots of like, oh, these magical aliens come in and show you your problems, and then they drift away. So there was no sense, I guess, I wonder if that was one of the things that I responded to at the time, was the assumption that because I'd watched Next Gen, and because I was so used to seeing these characters sort of blip in and blip out, that I just expected this was going to be a thing that they just sort of tossed off, like you said, just to sort of let's give him some psychotherapy and then move on, as opposed to being, no, there is going to be a through line of mysticism, whether you like it or not, that's going to go through the whole series.
Yeah, I think that was it. I think I think it seemed to me, that's the way that I was thinking about it, and it just seemed like, oh, okay, well, they're just making this thesis statement about
recovery, basically.
Yeah, basically, and and about what their job is as people exploring the stars and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I was fine with that, but but knowing now that it's like a core basis of the show, because I don't even know if I realized it was serialized right away. I thought that kind of came in a little bit later or something, but.
The first season is not as heavily serialized. It gets much more as it goes. So that the first season is much more traditional, but they still, I mean, because it's the same location every time, basically, there is still elements that recur. So you already start to get a sense of it, and then this realization really kicks in with the Dominion arc and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, knowing that, I'd be interested to see how I would look back on it after watching a substantial amount of it. Although I do have to say it didn't help that the woman they cast to play his wife was just
she's terrible.
She's awful.
Terrible. Yeah.
I wish they had just used Picard as all of those different things. So it's like him in a bikini, and then him dressed as a little kid, and then him playing baseball in like the 1910s or something.
I think Cisco's "ow" would have shattered eardrums if he had seen that out there. Yeah, that's the whole.
Those scenes in the thing where it's him and Picard and they're like face to face.
That's excellent.
Those are great.
Yeah,
those are awesome.
That's really, really terrific. Yeah. Let's see here. So I don't really know. Did you have any? I guess we can just sort of give final thoughts about the plot and everything before we move into the sort of final section. But I think that I like. This is not a great episode. It's maybe not even a very good episode. It's pretty solid, in my opinion. And I think it does a good job at being a pilot more than anything. And just the fact that they added a little bit of poetic license to the end in a way that Farpoint, never had, or like Where No Man Has Gone Before is basically just like, let's play dress up and pretend that we're shooting a sci-fi episode. This feels like they came at it with a purpose. And in a lot of ways, it highlights, it's more important or impressive to me how this highlights the flaws of TNG's pilot in a lot of ways, where that felt like simply rebooting TOS and sort of setting it 100 years in the future so that everything is new and shiny feels kind of odd to me, that's how they set it off as a series. Maybe not odd because it makes 100% sense, but it's certainly not original in any kind of sense. And this one, just the fact that they went so against the grain and everything is so different from the Trek that you had, like to the point where when I was younger, I didn't like it because I didn't like how these characters were interacting with my favorite characters. And that's kind of important to me, I think, and it's interesting.
I was just thinking now, another thing I think that turned me off a little bit is that, even though the space station exterior itself is a really cool design and pretty iconic, it doesn't have any interior sets that really are visually like iconic to me. Like when you think about TNG, you've got the engine room and the teleporter room and the bridge. Obviously, they're very
the conference room.
They're very the conference room. They're very like clear pictures in my mind. And this one they had none. It didn't really have any of that where it like sets like the main body of the interior of Deep Space Nine. I know it's supposed to be a shithole when they get there, but it didn't. There was nothing about the design of it or the way they shot it that made it very memorable to me.
Yeah.
So I feel like that was another thing that kind of darkened it for me a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'd agree.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I on the plus side that there's no like 5-minute saucer separation sequence that literally just exists so they can show off how they can do that. Oh God.
It's really I love that scene because Picard is like, Riker, fucking manually dock the saucer back to the thing. He risks thousands of lives just because he wants to have a dick measuring contest with Riker at the start of it. Cisco's a little bit better.
That's at least consistent because later on he forgoes the prime directive so he can ride a dune buggy down in the desert in Nemesis. So
all the rules are up in the air. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. We're going to take an audio break. We're going to play a clip, and then we're going to come back and give our final thoughts, ratings, read some patron thoughts, and all that stuff. So, see you soon.
I never left this ship.
You exist here.
I exist here. I don't know if you can understand. I see her like this. Every time I close my eyes, in the darkness, in the blink of an eye, I see her like this.
None of your past experiences help prepare you for this consequence.
And I have never figured out how to live without her.
So you choose to exist here. It is not linear.
No. It's not linear.
All right, guys, so we're going to wrap this up. We have a new segment on the show. We are inviting patrons who support us on Patreon to give a couple thoughts of the episodes that are coming up, and I'll read them online or on the podcast for people. It's a good way to get the people involved who listen to the show, get them.
And we're not just going to agree with you because you're giving us money.
That's right. And I'm not going to edit out the bits that you're totally wrong about. I'll read the whole thing. So Kyle from Patreon writes, hope I'm not too late to talk about Emissary. You're not, Kyle. This is just, I did set this up late, so I appreciate you writing in anyway. Overall, I'd say that the Emissary is the best, second best first episode of a Trek show after Broken Bow, which is the Enterprise pilot. The political and religious themes the show are known for are already present, but are handled clumsily, in my opinion. ASMR, ear stroking, and all. That's pretty good. Kira is badly written and performed at this early stage, far too openly antagonistic. Avery Brooks' style takes some getting used to, who is particularly bizarre. Also, why are the orbs named after a spherical shape when they look like floaty, sparkly peanuts?
Good question.
It's a good question.
Yeah, that is.
And then Tark writes, just watched The Emissary first time in years. It's aged pretty well, in my opinion. Some thoughts. If I were Picard, I would be super pissed that no one bothered to brief me about the whole Wolf 359 thing before Cisco walked in the door. Quark says, never trusted ale from a God-fearing people. Does he, or indeed the writer, not know that the finest beer known to man is brewed by Trappist monks? Clay, would you agree with that?
I don't know if I would. It's not my thing, but it's definitely many people's thing.
He says, the promenade is too fucking small. That's kind of your point there, Clay, about the sets not really sticking with you. The entire shtick of DS9 is that it's a space station, so why do they spend 10 minutes of the very first episode jumping through hoops to make it turn into a bloody starship? What'd you think about the moving the space station sequence? To me, it felt like artificial drama.
Yeah, I didn't like that.
Well,
honestly, the whole end thing with the space station and the Cardassians, I really didn't care for.
No, I thought it was kind of silly too.
Yeah, and like I also wasn't entirely sure what was going on because
you fell asleep halfway through when you woke up.
I'm not going to say that I didn't do that, but I did go back and rewatch what I missed. Because the Cardassian ship with what's the name, Dracula, whoever's on the one
Gold
who gets
Ducat.
into, who gets in through the wormhole.
Yep.
And then they're angry because they can't get to him, and so they have to move the ship to fight them. I couldn't really follow why they were fighting each other.
They were actually trying to move the reason they moved the station was because they were trying to claim rights to the wormhole.
Yeah.
Because that's very, which I actually liked. I like the idea of, I mean, I think it is kind of a forced moment. Again, I made the joke about the saucer separation. That really is this episode's saucer separation moment.
Yes.
And they also, they force in some, engineering is going to do crazy stuff because that's what you love about Star Trek. And he does do some crazy stuff, but it's, I thought that was interesting. The sort of standoff for the Cardassians at least gave you a sense that the Cardassians, oh dear.
That's going to be happening a lot on this show.
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah, we're going to continue to be a major problem. But yeah, it is a bit forced. It's a pilot. They're trying to do. I think they basically were trying to give something to sort of give a little bit of adrenaline into it while cutting back to Cisco floating around in the netherworld, having his esoteric conversation with space aliens.
Well, Clay,
also,
I was going
to say, also, it's kind of weird that when Cisco shows up at the end, he's like, "Hey guys, everything's fine. What's up with you guys?"
Yeah,
yeah. He shows up as you've got 4 ships firing on his friggin' station, and he's like, "Hey, no, everything's fine."
I've come to terms with my dead wife, so everything is okay at this point.
What have you guys been up to?
I think that it ties into the thing that we've always talked about, Clay. The worst dramatic moments on Star Trek is when someone's counting down and the camera is shaking. It's like this is not real drama. This is not really anything. This is just us having to kill time for 5 minutes until we get out of it. Tarek ends it with Cisco's whole "what it means to be human / linear time / some of our experiences" speech is incredibly well written and performed. All in all, a good opening episode that has me excited to revisit the series. I'd agree with that. I think so.
I really did like when they cut to the baseball scene. I was like, oh, fucking but when he used baseball to like explain,
it's a good metaphor.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Yeah.
It is really well written, and that was the scene where it got me. And I was like, okay, this is a little bit. This isn't just an alien of the week. They're kind of making a statement about stuff here, and I actually really like that stuff a lot.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they dug down and actually tried to figure out how to explain linear time as a concept was pretty impressive. Like, that's like, okay, you're not just saying, oh, they're magic, and no, the value of humanity is love. No, there's like nuance here. So
if I never saw another TV show that ended with the conflict being resolved by love, it would be too soon.
It's a good fantasy baseball team name too, like Linear Time or something like that. I think is something people could use. So that's it. We're gonna wrap it up with our ratings. Zach, we do a thing where we rate these shows on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being absolute garbage that you'd never see again. A 2 is an episode with some problems but had potential. A 3 is a thoroughly average episode of Star Trek. 4 is an episode you'd show to a friend who'd never seen it before, and 5 is an all-time classic. I'll go first. I'm going to give this one a 3, I think. It balances out. The opening hour is like a 2 for me, and then it's sort of the later stuff sort of balances out into an average episode. If you mix the very good stuff that I like at the end to the stuff in the beginning. And I think it turned out strong. It's much better than Farpoint. It's much better than anything TOS sort of gave us to set the stage for characters. And I enjoy it. I don't think it's really rewatchable because it's too long. I think they could have actually fit the episode down into an hour, a regular length, and it would have had the same effect on me. But
yeah, I think so too.
That's it for me, a 3 out of 5. So Clay, how about yourself?
Do I have to give it a 5 because it's technically the best episode of DS9 I've ever seen?
That's probably true. Everything is downhill from here.
No, I would give it a 3 as well. I don't know if I wouldn't point to this as something that I would show to someone who wanted to get into Star. Oh, I mean, I guess it's what depends on what they're interested in. But like, this wouldn't be one that I would throw out as something to get somebody into the concept of Star Trek. I don't think. Yeah, I had something else I was going to say, but I forgot what it was. So go ahead,
Zach.
I'd give it a 3 as well because I like copying other people. No, I feel like it's very average. I actually in some ways it's solidity. It's sort of a strength. It just remembering how clumsy and awful so much of the first season of Next Gen is. And the fact that there are no real moments in this. It can be boring, but there are no real moments in this pilot where I'm like, oh god, no one involved has any idea what they're doing. Oh, this is going to be bad.
That's a really good point. I don't think there's anything in it that's explicitly bad, but its worst sin for me is that it gets boring, I think.
I think they hadn't figured out, because this is this was a completely new concept for Trek, this idea of being in a single location. And like trying to explore all these different, because like you said, the diplomacy episodes were never my favorite as a kid either, and the idea of building an entire series out of that and I think they were clearly in this one being very conservative. Like it is very risky, that whole thing with the prophets, but it's also still, there's a certain next gen quality of, okay, we're going to have the magical space aliens come in and have the serious philosophical talk happen with the magical space aliens. And that works because this episode goes in a bit deeper, and it commits to it. But I feel like one of the problems with this is that they hadn't quite figured out what kind of show Deep Space Nine was going to be. But the fact that they've been making Next Gen for as long as they had, they'd figured out how to make at least a watchable Star Trek show, even if one that's not particularly as well paced or immediately. Because again, the big strength of Deep Space Nine for me was the serialization and the characters. I mean, the characters of the show, once it gets going, are really, really great. And you can't get that. It's really hard to sell that in a pilot, especially when you're basically just sort of introducing a new situation. You're introducing all these different races, this conflict, even though people who have presumably, maybe they've watched the Next Gen episode, maybe they haven't, but you have to introduce all these different concepts. You have to introduce the prophets, the Emissary, all this stuff, and the history of Cisco. So basically, there's not really a whole lot of time, even if it is 2 hours, like an hour and a half. It's the lived-in feeling you get with spending time with these people is where the show shines, and that's not really something you can do in a pilot. So yeah, I would. Sorry.
No, well, something that also kind of like as you're piling onto your list of things you do, one of the things that I do is every time Odo's on the scene, I'm like, my God, his makeup fucking sucks this early.
It's so bad. He looks like he's dying.
Yeah.
Like, it's so bad. And like, oh God, Kira's first haircut, I was like literally just cringing. But yeah, I'm surprised I didn't mention that in the review, because his makeup is just not good.
It's a very odd choice. It's like they said, make the makeup look like he's starting to melt, but he's still got form to his face.
And he's old. Yeah, he just he looks like a very, very old man. He reminded
like
me
Mitch
of
McConnell.
He reminded me of Admiral Jameson from that first season of TNG episode. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for coming on, Zach, Clay.
I will say, I would like to say, I think I would make an official statement that my favorite Star Trek uniform is the DS9 color shoulders one. I think that's a definite for me now.
Yeah, this they started off wearing your favorite outfits. They'll change them eventually, but you like these ones from the movies and everything like that. So
I do. I like the color shoulders, black body. It feels very very simple, very graphic, and I think it works really well.
Yeah. You guys have anything you want to mention? Clay, how was Comic-Con?
It was great. It was the best show I'd ever done, actually. So thank you for everybody who came out, if you're listening, and hopefully I'll see you at the next one.
Nice, absolutely. Yeah, we missed plugging that. Zach, you're up to anything you want to mention for people to check out?
I'm still writing for the AV Club review. Right now I'm reviewing Rick and Morty on Preacher, and I will presumably, I've been asked and they haven't told me not to, so I'll presumably be reviewing the new Star Trek when it premieres in September. So that's something to look forward to. Excellent.
Yeah, Discovery would be exciting. Clay, you watch Preacher, don't you?
I do. Yeah, I like Preacher a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not as hardcore a fan of the book as a lot of people are, so I'm not really a purist, and I think what they're doing with it has been really, really cool.
Guys, thank you very much. I'm not going to waste time on the Deep Space Nine episodes mentioning all the links and everything. You know how to do it.
We're not going to do another hour on Preacher since we're all here.
You were born in the internet age. You know how to click a link. The information to connect with us is in the podcast blurb, and it's on the YouTube video description. Only thing I want to plug is Patreon. If you guys go to the introduction video for Deep Space Nine, I laid out my 5-minute spiel about why I should support the show on Patreon. We greatly appreciate it. It is very, very helpful. And one of the new rewards is that the top tier get a shout out at the end. Basically the producers of the show. We got Tax Owl Bear, Kyle B, Joint Mango, Michael S, Doug V, and Tarek L. Guys, thank you very much. I appreciate it very, very much. You do make the show happen. Zach, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
Clay, thank you for coming on, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to seeing how my opinion shifts on this show. Not that I didn't like it, but it's going to be an interesting watch for me, I think.
No, I appreciate your take on it, because your take of this episode kind of reminded me how I felt about the show when it came out, which is interesting. Maybe it's just a tougher show to sort of, it's tough to break out of the TNG mold and, as you were saying, like get your head straight for the new series.
Yeah. I think it's kind of a tough sell, to be honest with you, coming out of the gate with this episode. But it sounds like they wrap their heads around it and figure it out.
They do. Guys, thank you very much for listening. I'll see you next time.